When I moved to Harmony Creek, I thought I was just entering a pie contest. I quickly learned that in this idyllic town, tradition was a weapon, and some secrets tasted like poison. The silence in Harmony Creek wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, watchful kind of quiet that presses in on you from all sides. My mom and I had moved here 3 months ago for her new hospital job, swapping the noise of the city for the chirping of crickets and the rustle of ancient oak trees. On the surface it was idyllic. White picket fences, perfectly manicured lawns, and a town square that looked like it was ripped from a 1950s postcard. But beneath that glossy finish, there was something else. A current of appraisal. Every time I walked into the general store, conversations would dip to a murmur. Every time I passed a porch, the rocking chairs would slow their rhythm. I was the new kid, sure, but it was more than that. I was the only black kid in a town that seemed to have been preserved in amber, and my presence was a crack in the glass. My mom felt it too, but she was determined to make it work. "Just give it time, Leo," she'd say, her smile a little too bright. "People in small towns are just cautious. We just have to show them we're good neighbors." So I tried. I smiled. I said, "Good morning," to brick walls of indifference, and I kept my head down. It wasn't until the flyers went up for the 150th Annual Founders Day Festival that I realized keeping my head down wasn't going to be an option. The centerpiece of the festival was the Harmony Creek Pie Bake-Off. This wasn't some casual county fair competition. This was the town's Super Bowl. The winner got their name engraved on a massive silver platter displayed in the town hall, a $1,000 prize, and a year's worth of what passed for reverence in this town. But more than that, they won a legacy, and for the last 47 years that legacy had belonged to one family, the Abernathys. Mr. T. Abernathy was the town patriarch, a man whose family had supposedly helped found the place. He owned the biggest farm, the local hardware store, and a seat on every council that mattered. His wife, Eleanor Abernathy, was the reigning pie queen. Her heritage apple pie was the stuff of legend. People spoke about it in hushed, reverent tones, as if it were a sacred artifact. They said the secret was in the apples grown in a private Abernathy orchard that no one else had access to. The truth was, no one had seriously challenged them in decades. It was an institution. The Abernathy pie was as much a part of Founders Day as the town charter itself. Normally I wouldn't have cared, but when I saw the flyer, something stirred in me. It was a picture of my Grandma Rose standing in her kitchen, her hands dusted with flour, a proud smile on her face. She passed 2 years ago, but her memory was as vivid as the scent of cinnamon and nutmeg that used to fill her house. Grandma Rose made the best sweet potato pie in the entire state of Georgia. It wasn't just a dessert, it was a story in a crust. It was her mother's recipe and her mother's before that. It was our heritage. And in my hands I held her worn, grease-stained recipe book, her elegant script detailing every secret. A thought, wild and audacious, sparked in my mind. What if I entered? What if I brought a piece of my heritage to Harmony Creek? It started as a whisper, a way to feel closer to my grandma, to bring a piece of her, of us, into this suffocatingly uniform town. But the more I thought about it, the more the whisper grew into a roar. I saw the polite, dismissive smiles I got every day. I heard the silence that greeted me in the store. This wasn't just about pie anymore. It was about making them see me. The next day, I walked to the town hall to sign up. A woman with a tight gray bun and an even tighter smile, Mrs. Gable, sat at the registration table. She looked up from her paperwork, and her smile faltered for a fraction of a second when she saw me. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice dripping with forced sweetness. "I'd like to enter the pie bake-off," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She blinked. The bake-off? Oh, honey, that's sweet, but it's a very serious competition." "I'm serious," I replied, meeting her gaze. She fiddled with her pen. "Well, it's just, we have so many entrants already, and it's mostly, well, it's a town tradition." The translation was clear. "It's our tradition, not yours." Just then, a deep voice boomed from behind me. "Everything all right here, Mildred?" I turned to see Mr. Abernathy himself. He was tall and broad, with silver hair and a condescendingly warm smile that didn't reach his cold, blue eyes. "Just helping this young man," Mrs. Gable stammered. He wants to enter the bake-off." Mr. Abernathy's eyes landed on me. He looked me up and down, a slow, deliberate assessment that made my skin crawl. "Is that so?" he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Admire the ambition, son. But my Eleanor's heritage apple pie, well, it's a part of this town's history. You understand history, don't you?" It wasn't a question. It was a warning. My heart was pounding, but Grandma Rose's face flashed in my mind. I stood up a little straighter. "Yes, sir, I do. My family has history, too. I'll be making my grandmother's sweet potato pie." The words hung in the air. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Mr. Abernathy's smile vanished completely. For the first time I saw something raw and ugly flicker in his eyes. He saw this not as a kid entering a contest, but as a challenge, an invasion. After a tense moment, Mrs. Gable reluctantly slid the sign-up sheet towards me. I signed my name, Leo Washington, in big, bold letters. The whole walk home, I felt like I had a target on my back, but I also felt a thrill. The fight was on. That night, I opened my grandma's recipe book. I laid out the ingredients, feeling a deep connection to her with every measured cup of sugar and pinch of spice. The key, she always wrote, was the sweet potatoes. They had to be a specific heirloom variety, perfectly roasted to bring out their deep caramel sweetness. My mom had managed to find a farmer a few towns over who grew them, and I had a whole bag, my secret weapon, sitting on the counter. The house filled with the warm, comforting aroma of my practice pie. It was perfect. I was ready. The next evening, 2 days before the competition, I went to get the bag of sweet potatoes to prepare them for the final bake. I reached into the pantry, my fingers closing around the burlap sack. But something was wrong. It felt wet. I pulled the bag out into the light. A dark, sticky liquid was seeping through the bottom, and a rancid, sour smell hit my nostrils. My blood ran cold. I tore the bag open. Inside, every single one of my perfect, irreplaceable sweet potatoes had been systematically sliced open and filled with what looked and smelled like vinegar and spoiled milk. They were completely, utterly ruined. On top of the pulpy mess was a small, neatly folded piece of paper. With trembling hands, I opened it. There were only 5 words, written in a stark, familiar script. "Some traditions are worth preserving." I stood there in the quiet of our kitchen, the sour stench of sabotage filling my lungs. My grandma's legacy, a ruined pulp in a burlap sack. Rage, cold and sharp, coiled in my gut. This wasn't a prank. This was a message, delivered with chilling precision. They hadn't just tried to take me out of a contest. They had desecrated a memory. They had taken something that was mine, something that was us, and filled it with poison. I crushed the note in my fist, the paper crinkling under the pressure. Some traditions are worth preserving. My tradition was love and family, baked into a pie. Theirs was apparently hate, served cold. When my mom got home from her shift, she found me sitting at the kitchen table just staring at the ruined sack. The smell had faded, but the weight of it was still in the room. I didn't have to say a word. She saw my face, saw the bag on the floor, and her own face, usually so full of determined optimism, hardened into a mask of fury. She picked up the note, her knuckles white as she read it. "We should go to the police," she said, her voice tight. "And say what?" I shot back, the bitterness spilling out of me. "That our sweet potatoes went bad, that we found a note? They'll say it was a prank by some local kids. They'll look at me, and they'll look at Mr. Abernathy, the man who practically owns this town, and who do you think they'll believe?" She knew I was right. In Harmony Creek, the scales of justice were already tipped. "So what do we do, Leo?" she asked, her voice softening. "Do you want to withdraw? We can just let it go. No one would blame you." I looked at her, at the worry etched around her eyes. Part of me wanted to say yes. I wanted to pack our bags and drive away from the suffocating silence and the hateful whispers. But then I thought of Grandma Rose. I thought of her laughing in her kitchen, telling me that the secret to her pie wasn't just the ingredients, It was the love you put in when the world tried to take it out. Giving up would be letting them win. It would be letting them say my heritage, my family's story, wasn't welcome here. No, I said, my voice firm. I'm not withdrawing. I'm going to bake that pie. But how? She asked, gesturing to the sack. The farmer said that was his last bag until the next harvest. That was the question. For the next 24 hours, we were on a mission. We called every farm, every specialty grocer within a 100-mile radius. The answer was always the same. Heirloom sweet potatoes. Sorry, son, all sold out for the season. With every no, the hope dwindled, replaced by a gnawing desperation. Mr. Abernathy hadn't just sabotaged my ingredients, he had cut off my supply chain. He knew exactly what he was doing. By noon the day before the bake-off, I was ready to admit defeat. I was walking through the town square, my head hung low, when I stopped in front of the town hall. I looked through the glass at the giant silver platter, the prize. I scanned the names engraved on it, a long list of Abernathys. But then, near the top, from before their dynasty began, I saw another name, repeated 3 times in a row. Peterson. Martha Peterson. I remembered seeing an older woman with that name on her mailbox, always out in her garden, a few streets over from us. She was quiet, kept to herself, and never made eye contact for more than a second. A crazy idea, a last-ditch Hail Mary, formed in my mind. I walked to her house. The picket fence was peeling, but her garden was a riot of color, meticulously cared for. I found her kneeling, pulling weeds from a patch of tomatoes. "Mrs. Peterson?" I asked, my voice hesitant. She looked up, her eyes wary behind thick glasses. "Yes?" "I'm Leo Washington. My mom and I just moved into the old Miller house." She gave a curt nod and went back to her weeds. I took a deep breath. "I saw your name in the town hall," I said. "On the bake-off platter. You won. 3 times. This made her pause. She sat back on her heels and really looked at me for the first time. A flicker of something I couldn't read crossed her face. "That was a long time ago," she said flatly. "I'm in the competition this year," I pressed on. "I was going to make my grandmother's sweet potato pie, but my ingredients were spoiled, all of them, and I can't find any more of the right kind." I didn't say who I thought did it. I didn't have to. The way she glanced up and down the street, the sudden tension in her shoulders, told me she understood perfectly. She knew how this town worked. "The Abernathys have their ways," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They don't like new recipes." She stood up, wiping the dirt from her hands onto her apron. For a moment I thought she was going to tell me to leave. Instead, she gestured for me to follow her to the back of her house, to a small, weathered shed. The air inside was cool and smelled of earth and dried herbs. "I don't have what you're looking for," she said, pulling an old wooden crate from under a dusty tarp. "No one in town does. Abernathy made sure of that years ago. Bought up the old Henderson farm, the only other place that grew them." She paused, a glint in her eye. "But he doesn't own the whole county." "Not yet." She reached into the crate and pulled out a hand-drawn map on yellowed parchment paper. "There's an old patch," she whispered, her finger tracing a faint line that veered off a marked trail. "Grows wild, deep in the woods off the old miller's path. The soil's just right. The old folks knew about it. My grandmother showed me. They're smaller but sweeter than any you can buy." She pushed the map into my hand. "No one's been there in years. Be careful, it's Abernathy land now, technically, but he never goes that far back." That night, with a flashlight and a shovel, I felt like I was hunting for buried treasure. The moon was a sliver in the sky, and the woods were alive with the rustling of unseen creatures. I followed Mrs. Peterson's map, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and adrenaline. I found the fallen log she'd drawn, the crooked oak tree. I pushed through a thicket of ferns, and there it was, a small, hidden clearing, bathed in moonlight. The dark green, heart-shaped leaves of sweet potato vines covered the ground. I fell to my knees and started digging with my bare hands. The soil was rich and cool. My fingers closed around a firm, oblong shape. I pulled it out. It was a sweet potato, smaller than the ones I'd lost, but with a deep, vibrant orange skin. It was perfect. A wave of triumphant relief washed over me. He hadn't beaten me. I started digging, gathering as many as I could carry, my mind already racing through the steps of my grandma's recipe. I had just finished filling my bag and was standing up to leave, when a brilliant beam of light sliced through the darkness, pinning me in place. The beam came from a powerful flashlight, and behind it, a large silhouette stood at the edge of the clearing. A voice, cold and familiar, cut through the night, dripping with menace. "Looking for something, boy?" My blood turned to ice. The silhouette took a step forward, and the moonlight caught the sharp, angry features of Mr. Abernathy. He wasn't alone. 2 other men, large and grim-faced, flanked him like guard dogs. One of them I recognized as his farmhand, a man named Jed, who always looked like he'd swallowed something sour. I was trapped. The clearing, which seconds before had felt like a sanctuary, was now a cage. "I asked you a question," Mr. Abernathy said, his voice dangerously low. He took another step, the beam of his flashlight tracing a path from my face down to the burlap sack at my feet, filled with my hard-won treasure. "That's private property you're on, and that's theft." "They're growing wild," I stammered, my mind racing for an escape I knew wasn't there. The woods were too thick, and they stood between me and the path back to town. A dry, humorless chuckle escaped his lips. "Wild? Son, every speck of dirt for 5 miles in any direction belongs to me. That means what grows on it belongs to me too." He gestured towards the sack with his flashlight. "Now you're going to hand that over. Then you're going to go home and forget all about this little baking contest." The injustice of it was a physical blow. He had destroyed my property, my family's heritage, and now he was accusing me of theft for trying to recover it. The rage from the other night came roaring back, drowning out the fear. "No," I said, my voice shaking but clear. I bent down and gripped the top of the burlap sack, pulling it protectively behind me. "You destroyed the ones I bought. This is the only way I can make my grandmother's pie." Mr. Abernathy's face hardened into a granite mask. The pretense of the folksy town patriarch was gone, replaced by the cold arrogance of a man who had never been told no. "I don't know what you're talking about," he sneered, "but I do know you're a thief and a trespasser. Jed, get the bag." The farmhand started towards me, his boots crunching on the forest floor. I scrambled backward, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was a teenager. These were grown men. There was no way I could fight them. I was about to give in, to just let the bag go, when I heard my grandma's voice in my head, as clear as day. "Don't ever let a bully decide what you're worth, Leo." In that split second, I made a decision. I wasn't going to win a fight, but I wasn't going to surrender either. As Jed reached for the sack, I did the only thing I could think of. I swung the heavy bag with all my might, not at him, but away from him, towards the darkest, thickest part of the woods. The bag flew through the air, landing with a soft thud somewhere in the dense underbrush, out of sight. Jed stopped, stunned. Mr. Abernathy's face contorted with fury. "You stupid kid! Now you've done it!" He shoved his flashlight into Jed's hands. "Find it! Find every last one!" As his 2 men began crashing through the bushes, their flashlight beams cutting frantic patterns in the dark, Mr. Abernathy turned his full attention back to me. He stalked forward until he was just inches from my face. I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "You really don't get it, do you?" he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. "This isn't about pie. It's about order. It's about knowing your place. Some things in this town don't change. The Abernathys win the bake-off. That's the way it is. The way it's always been." "Maybe it's time for a change," I shot back, my own voice trembling with a mixture of terror and defiance. His eyes narrowed into slits. He raised a hand, and for a terrifying moment, I thought he was going to strike me. Instead, he let it drop, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "Change? Oh, you'll get a change." He leaned in closer. "The contest is at noon. Let's see you bake a pie with no ingredients. By the time my men find those potatoes, it'll be morning. You lose. It's over." He turned and strode back towards the path, leaving me alone in the dark clearing. I could still hear his men searching, cursing, as they stumbled through the thorns. I waited until their lights faded into the distance, my body trembling with leftover adrenaline. He was right. It was over. I had no ingredients, and it was the middle of the night. I had nothing. Defeated, I began the long, dark walk back home. When I stumbled through my front door, my mom was waiting, her face etched with panic. "Leo, where have you been? I was about to call the sheriff." I collapsed into a kitchen chair, the story spilling out of me. Mrs. Peterson, the map, the wild potatoes, Abernathy and his thugs. I told her how I'd thrown the bag into the woods. "It's gone," I finished, my voice cracking. "I lost it all. He won." My mom listened in silence, her expression shifting from fear to a quiet, burning anger. She put a hand on my shoulder. "No, he didn't," she said softly. "He didn't win. He just showed us exactly who he is." She looked at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 2 a.m. "And we're going to show this town who we are." She walked over to the pantry, the same one where I'd found the ruined potatoes. She began pulling things out. A can of pumpkin puree, a bag of brown sugar, a bottle of molasses, spices. She set them on the counter next to my grandma's recipe book. "What are you doing?" I asked, confused. "Your Grandma Rose was a genius in the kitchen," she said, her voice filled with a new energy. But she was practical, too. She always said, "When you don't have what you want, you use what you have." She opened the recipe book to a page near the back, one I'd always skipped over. The title in my grandma's familiar script read, "Emergency Pumpkin Pie, When the Sweet Potatoes Let You Down." It was a variation of the main recipe, adapted for canned pumpkin. It wasn't the original. It wasn't the legacy pie I had set out to make. It was a backup plan, a footnote. But as I looked at the ingredients on the counter, and then at my mom's determined face, I realized it was more than that. It was a lesson in resilience. It was our answer to their hate. We worked through the night. The exhaustion I felt was replaced by a feverish sense of purpose. We measured and mixed, the familiar comforting smells of cinnamon, nutmeg, and ginger filling our small kitchen, a fragrant shield against the ugliness outside. By the time the sun started to rise, 4 of the most beautiful pumpkin pies I had ever seen were cooling on the rack. The crust was flaky. The filling was a perfect deep amber. They weren't the pie I had intended to make, but they were filled with just as much love and a whole lot more fight. We arrived at the town square just before noon. The festival was in full swing. The air was thick with the smell of popcorn and grilled hot dogs. At the center of it all was the bake-off pavilion. I walked towards it, my mum carrying the pies behind me. As we got closer, I saw a small crowd gathered around the judge's table. At the head of the table sat Mr. Abernathy, a smug, triumphant look on his face. He caught my eye, and his smile widened. He thought I had come to formally withdraw. He thought he had broken me. I met his gaze, lifted my chin, and walked forward to place my entry on the table. The murmuring crowd went silent. It wasn't sweet potato pie. It was pumpkin. But it was there, and as I set it down, I saw Mrs. Peterson standing at the edge of the crowd. She looked at my pie, then at me, and for the first time she gave me a small, conspiratorial smile. Then I looked past Abernathy to the far end of the judge's table. My breath caught in my throat. Sitting there, with a judge's ribbon pinned to his lapel, was the town sheriff, Sheriff Miller. The same man I was sure would have ignored my complaints. And he was staring directly at my pie, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. The silence in the pavilion was absolute. Every eye was on my pie. Mr. Abernathy's smug smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of disbelief, then pure, unadulterated rage. He looked from my pumpkin pie to my face, his mind clearly scrambling to understand how I had pulled this off. I could see the questions warring in his cold eyes. Where did he get the ingredients? How did he bake it in time? He had played what he thought was a winning hand, only to find I hadn't folded. I had just changed the game. Sheriff Miller cleared his throat, breaking the spell. He was a big, quiet man, and his gaze was steady and serious. "All right, folks," he announced, his voice carrying across the square. "Looks like we have our final entry. Let the judging commence." One by one the judges tasted the entries. There were blueberry pies, cherry pies, a pecan pie that looked pretty good. They offered polite compliments to each baker. Then they came to Eleanor Abernathy's famous heritage apple pie. As always, they made a show of it, closing their eyes, sighing with theatrical pleasure. Mr. Abernathy watched them, his confidence returning, a smirk settling back onto his lips. He was on his home turf. This was his ceremony, his prize. My entry was just an unexpected and soon-to-be-forgotten annoyance. Finally, they reached my pie. The head judge, Mrs. Gable, the same woman who had tried to discourage me from signing up, cut a slice with visible reluctance. She took a small, hesitant bite, and then she stopped. Her eyes widened slightly. She took another, bigger bite. Down the line, the other judges had the same reaction. A murmur went through the crowd as they saw it. Sheriff Miller was the last to taste it. He picked up his fork, cut a clean slice, and ate it slowly, deliberately. He didn't close his eyes or make a show of it. He just ate, his expression thoughtful. When he was done, he set his fork down and looked directly at me. The judges huddled together, whispering. Mr. Abernathy looked on, his face a thundercloud. This wasn't going according to plan. The deliberation took longer than it ever had before. You could feel the tension ratcheting up in the tent. This wasn't just about the best dessert anymore. It was a referendum on the town itself. Finally, Sheriff Miller stood up, holding the winner's certificate. This was a difficult decision, he began, his voice calm and even. Every entry was a credit to this town's traditions. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. However, the judge's decision is unanimous. Mr. Abernathy puffed out his chest, a victorious smile already forming. The winner of the 150th Annual Harmony Creek Pie Bake-Off, the sheriff boomed, his eyes finding mine in the crowd, is Leo Washington for his family's pie. The gasp from the crowd was a physical force. Mr. Abernathy looked like he'd been struck by lightning. His face went from red to a pasty white. Eleanor Abernathy let out a small, strangled cry. For a moment, no one moved. Then a smattering of applause started, tentative at first, then growing stronger. I saw Mrs. Peterson clapping, a genuine, broad smile on her face. A few other people I didn't even know joined in. It wasn't a roar, but it was a start. It was the sound of a crack forming in the town's foundation of silence. As I walked forward in a daze to accept the prize, Mr. Abernathy lunged towards the judge's table. "This is an outrage," he bellowed, his voice cracking with fury. "You can't be serious. A pumpkin pie? Over a 47-year tradition?" Sheriff Miller didn't flinch. He held up a hand, silencing the crowd. "We judged on taste, Mr. Abernathy. The rules are clear. The best pie wins." Then he did something I never expected. He turned his gaze on Abernathy, and his voice dropped, becoming hard as iron. "But since you brought up tradition, let's talk about it." He walked over to the evidence table, where my ruined burlap sack sat next to the spiteful note. The crowd murmured, confused. "This sack," the sheriff announced, his voice ringing with authority, "belonging to young Mr. Washington here, was found on the edge of your property this morning, Mr. Abernathy, right near a patch of wild-growing heirloom sweet potatoes." Abernathy went rigid. That's circumstantial." "Is it?" the sheriff countered smoothly. "My deputy also found fresh tire tracks leading from the spot, tracks that happened to be a perfect match for your farm truck. And Jed," he said, nodding towards the pale-faced farmhand in the crowd, "he's been real talkative this morning about a late-night trip to the woods." The pieces clicked into place. Sheriff Miller hadn't just been sitting there as a judge. He had been investigating. He had seen the ugliness that I thought was invisible. "But what's most interesting," the sheriff continued, picking up the note, "is this. Some traditions are worth preserving." The handwriting looked familiar, so I took a drive to the town hall, pulled a few public documents you signed. Your business license, a zoning permit. The handwriting is a perfect match. He held the note up for all to see. "You see, Mr. Abernathy, we have traditions in this town. We value fairness. We value decency. And we don't take kindly to bullies who try to poison our community with hate. That's a tradition I'm very interested in preserving." The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the heavy, watchful silence of before. It was the silence of shock, of revelation. The people of Harmony Creek were finally seeing the man behind the curtain, and they didn't like what they saw. Mr. Abernathy stood there, exposed and utterly defeated, his legacy turning to ash right before his eyes. Later, after the crowd had dispersed in stunned whispers and Mr. Abernathy had been escorted away by his own sheriff for questioning, Mrs. Peterson came over to me. She was holding a small, potted plant. "My grandma always said the best way to make sure you have what you need," she said, handing it to me, "is to grow it yourself." It was a sweet potato vine, a starter for my own garden. "Welcome to the neighborhood, Leo," she said, her smile reaching her eyes. That evening my mom and I sat on our porch, the giant silver platter gleaming on the table between us. People walked by, but this time they didn't just stare. They nodded. They smiled. Some even raised a hand and said, "Evening." An old tradition in Harmony Creek, I supposed, but it felt brand new. It turned out my pie hadn't just been a dessert. It was a story. Not just my grandma's story, but a new one. It was the story of how a quiet town, stuck in its ways, finally learned that the best traditions aren't the ones you preserve in amber. They're the ones you're willing to fight for, to adapt, and to share with everyone. And that tastes sweeter than any pie in the world.